In 2024, Huberman uncovered something that Jung mapped out a century ago, that spiritually awakened individuals don't just change their minds about life, they literally rewire their brains. And this isn't an instantaneous shift, it's a slow, progressive, and often painful process. Because the more you awaken, the more you have to let go of. And the most unsettling part? You don't choose to let go. Your brain simply stops finding meaning in the very things that once defined you. In his episode with Dr. Michael Thompson, a Jungian psychoanalyst, Huberman explored a phenomenon that modern neuroscience now confirms. The process Jung called individuation isn't just metaphorical, it's neuroplastic. Your brain literally rewires itself when you start to wake up. Neural networks that once supported your social persona begin to weaken. Circuits that kept you hooked on external validation stop firing, and gradually, without you even realizing it, you start abandoning things that society as a whole values. Jung warned about this back in 1921 when he wrote Psychological Types. He described what Huberman now calls directed neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself in response to a profound shift in consciousness. But Jung went even further. He said this reorganization comes at a cost. Everything that isn't authentic has to die, and that includes relationships, ambitions, identities, beliefs. Everything. Over the next few minutes, you're going to discover exactly what awakened people let go of, not because they want to, but because the neuroplastic process of awakening makes it impossible to keep carrying what isn't real. You'll understand why this is happening to you right now, why you feel like you're drifting away from people who were once close to you, why your old goals seem empty, why you can no longer feign interest in superficial conversations. And more importantly, you'll discover why academia often downplays this connection between Jung and Huberman. Why no one told you that spiritual awakening is a measurable brain process. And why understanding this can save you from years of trying to go back to who you were, when in reality, your brain has already decided you'll never be that person again. Let's start with what Jung discovered and Huberman validated in 2024. There are neurological stages to awakening, and each stage forces you to abandon something. In the episode with Dr. David Anderson, a neuroscientist who studied consciousness for decades, Huberman discussed something called the perception box. It's how your brain filters reality based on beliefs, memories, and biases. Jung called this the persona, and both agree, when you start to awaken, this box begins to dissolve. Dr. Anderson explained that neuroimaging studies reveal something fascinating. People in altered states of consciousness, whether through deep meditation, psychedelics, or what Jung called active imagination, exhibit specific brain patterns. The default mode network, the brain network responsible for the sense of a separate self, decreases its activity, and when this happens, your perception of reality shifts radically. Jung knew this without fMRI. He called it ego dissolution, and he said something that still scares people today. This process is often irreversible. Once you see through the illusion of the persona, you can't unsee it. Your brain has literally lost the capacity to believe in the mask you used to wear, and that's where the letting go begins. The first thing awakened people abandon is the need for external approval, but not in the romanticized way that self-help gurus portray it. It's neurological. 2024 studies on neuroplasticity show that meditation and self-reflection practices decrease activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region involved in social anxiety and fear of judgment. Jung observed this in his patients. The deeper they went into the individuation process, the less they cared about external opinions. Not because they became arrogant, but because their brains literally stopped processing social validation as a primary reward. Huberman discussed this with Dr. Thompson. The Jungian psychoanalyst said something profound. The awakened person realizes that the approval of others was the most sophisticated prison they ever inhabited. And Huberman added, the scientific validation, the dopaminergic reward system recalibrates. What once gave you pleasure, likes, praise, recognition, stops activating the reward circuit in the same way. You're not being virtuous. You simply don't feel the chemical hit anymore. And this is where the isolation begins, because society as a whole is built around this system of external validation. When you stop playing that game, people can feel it. They don't consciously understand what's changed in you, but subconsciously, they perceive that you've exited the matrix of mutual approval, and that threatens them. Jung called this confronting the collective shadow. When you stop participating in the shared illusion, you become a mirror for everyone who's still trapped within it, and mirrors are often destroyed. But before you think this is just deep psychology without scientific basis, let me show you what Huberman revealed recently. On the Lex Fridman podcast in 2024, he talked about the Jungian shadow in a way that few neuroscientists have the courage to do. He said that Jung was right. We all have the capacity for both good and evil. But there's a specific group, about 2 to 5% of the population, who spend significant time exploring the darker regions of the psyche. And here's the part that academia doesn't want you to know. These 2 to 5% aren't psychopaths. They're the ones who are awakening. They're the ones who are integrating the shadow, not denying it. And the process of integration requires you to abandon the second thing, the illusion of purity. Society sells you a fantasy. Good people are pure, bad people are dark. But Jung and Huberman agree, this division is childish and neurologically impossible. Your brain has circuits for everything, capacity for love and hate, creation and destruction, altruism and selfishness. The point isn't to eliminate one side, it's to integrate both. And when you start to integrate your shadow, something disturbing happens. You stop judging others, not because you've become morally superior, but because you recognize in yourself the capacity for everything you see in others. 2024. Neuroimaging studies show that experienced meditators have less activation in the amygdala when viewing immoral behaviors. Not because they're insensitive, but because they've developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites without judgment. And then you abandon the third thing, relationships based on mutual judgment. Think about it. How many of your friendships are sustained by gossiping about others? Why do people judge others together? Why do they feel superior together? When you stop judging, those friendships die because they were never real. They were alliances against the world. Jung saw this repeatedly. He wrote that the greatest fear of an individual in the process of individuation isn't solitude. It's realizing that most of their relationships were transactional, built on mutual need, not on genuine love. And when you don't need them in the same way anymore, they dissolve. Huberman added the neuroscientific layer in his conversation with Dr. Hollis. As you become more integrated, your nervous system regulates itself from within. You stop seeking compulsive co-regulation. You don't need other people to calm you down, to validate you, to complete you. Your brain has developed stronger circuits for self-regulation. Studies show that contemplative practices strengthen connections between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, allowing for greater internal emotional control. And that's where the loneliest part of waking up comes in. You abandon the need to belong. Jung said that the greatest act of courage is to become an individual, because to individuate literally means to cease being divisible. You stop dividing yourself into different versions, to fit into different groups. You become one, and a person who is one doesn't fit into tribes that demand conformity. Hold on, because here's what Huberman will never publicly admit, but that his episodes reveal. When he lists the 8 pillars of mental and physical health, the 8th pillar is spiritual grounding. He doesn't elaborate much on it, but for those who know Jung, it's clear. He's talking about individuation, about finding your internal center, about stopping to seek outside what can only be found inside. And this leads us to the 4th thing that awakened people abandon: the search for external meaning. Society teaches you that meaning comes from achievements, career, family, legacy, impact, and all of that is valid. But Jung discovered something radical. Real meaning doesn't come from doing. It comes from being. And when you awaken to that, all your ambitions based on proving something die, not instantly, slowly. You'll still work, you'll still have goals, but the energy behind them changes completely. You're no longer trying to fill a void. You're expressing a fullness. Dr. Anderson, on Huberman's episode about consciousness, talked about flow states. He said that in these states, the sense of a separate self disappears. You're not doing an activity. You are the activity. Jung called this the transcendent function. Huberman calls it neuroplasticity in a state of flow. But they both agree. In that state, there's no searching, there's only expression. And when you start living more in these states, you abandon the 5th thing, the obsession with control. Because control requires a controller, a separate self that manages the rest. But when the default mode network decreases its activity, when the sense of a separate self dissolves, who's controlling? No one. And paradoxically, that's when things flow better. Jung wrote about Wu Wei without knowing Taoism deeply. He called it letting the self guide. Huberman talks about trusting the automatic processes of the nervous system. Same thing. Different languages, same truth. Control is the ego's illusion, and when you wake up, that illusion becomes unsustainable. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like nihilism, like giving up, like becoming passive. And that's exactly what society wants you to think. Because if you wake up, you stop being productive in the way the system needs. You stop consuming compulsively to fill voids. You stop competing neurotically for status. You stop being a good cog in the machine. And this is where we need to talk about what Jung revealed, and that almost destroyed him. The collective unconscious doesn't want you to individuate. The mass wants you to remain part of it, and it will do everything to pull you back. It will call you selfish, alienated, crazy, because your individuation is an existential threat to those who are still fused with the collective. Huberman touched on this in a subtle way when he talks about peer pressure and how the human brain is wired for social conformity. He's describing the power of the collective unconscious. Studies show that disagreeing with the group activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Your brain literally feels pain when you separate from the tribe. So when awakened, people start abandoning collective beliefs. It's not comfortable. It's agonizing. Your brain is fighting against millions of years of evolution that say, staying with the tribe is survival. But awakening demands something more radical, surviving the expulsion from the tribe. And that's when you abandon the 6th thing, the need to be understood. Jung lived this. He was expelled from Freud's circle. He was called a mystic, crazy, unscientific. But he continued, Because he realized something fundamental. Being understood by the mass is incompatible with being yourself. You have to choose. Huberman faces a modern version of this. He's criticized for talking about spirituality, for citing Jung, for admitting that science doesn't have all the answers, but he continues. Because deep down, he knows what Jung knew. Truth isn't democratic. It doesn't need approval from the majority to be true. And this leads us to the protocol, the practical part that unites Jung and Huberman in a way that no one is teaching. How do you navigate this process of abandonment without destroying yourself? How do you wake up without going insane? Jung created a method called active imagination. Huberman studies something called non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR. Dr. Anderson talked about meditation and altered states of consciousness, and they all converge on the same point. You need to create internal space for the brain to reorganize. Here's what neuroscience from 2024 and 2025 has shown. When you practice non-ordinary states of consciousness, meditation, NSDR, deep contemplation, you're not just relaxing, you're literally remodeling your brain, increasing gray matter in regions associated with emotional regulation, memory, and self-awareness, decreasing activity in regions associated with defensive ego and social worry. A recent study described how spiritual practices create a feedback loop. You practice, your brain changes. The changed brain makes it easier to practice, which changes the brain more. Jung called this the process of individuation. Huberman calls it directed neuroplasticity. It's the same thing, and here's the hybrid protocol that no one is telling you. Morning, sunlight in your eyes as soon as you wake up. Huberman's protocol. But why? Because it regulates your circadian rhythm, which stabilizes your mood and energy. Emotional stability is a prerequisite for doing shadow work. If you're dysregulated, you're going to resist everything your shadow tries to show you. After the sun is up, 20 minutes of Jungian practice. It could be journaling. It could be active imagination. It could simply be sitting and asking, what am I avoiding feeling today? Jung used to say that the shadow speaks through the discomfort you resist. Huberman would say, you're training your prefrontal cortex to tolerate difficult emotions without limbic reactivity. Afternoon, movement, exercise, not for aesthetics, but because movement integrates. Jung observed that patients trapped in mental loops benefited from physical activity. Huberman explains, exercise increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which facilitates neuroplasticity. You're literally fertilizing the soil for new neural connections. Evening, dream analysis. Jung revolutionized this. He said that dreams are messages from the unconscious. Huberman would say, dreams are the brain processing and integrating experiences. REM sleep is when emotional memories are consolidated and given new meaning. If you ignore your dreams, you're ignoring the work your brain is doing while you sleep. Huberman's sleep protocol. Total darkness. Cool temperature with no screens before bed. Why? Because you need quality REM sleep. And quality REM sleep is when Jungian integration happens. Without good sleep, there is no individuation. Simple as that. And weekly, intentional confrontation with the shadow. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So once a week, ask, what do I judge in others that is actually my own unlived self? Huberman talks about mirror neurons and projection. When you see something in others that bothers you viscerally, your mirror neurons are firing. Your brain is recognizing in another what it denies in itself. Shadow work is collecting those projections. But here's what neuroscience proves, and it's going to blow your mind. You cannot integrate the shadow with the ego. The ego is the system that created the shadow in the first place. The ego divided you into good and bad, into acceptable and unacceptable. To integrate, you need something larger than the ego. Jung called it the self. Huberman doesn't use that term. But when he talks about expanded states of consciousness, flow states, dissolution of the default mode network, he's talking about the same thing. And this is where we get to the seventh and most disturbing thing. That awakened people abandon. The belief that you are who you think you are. The ego is a narrative. A story your brain tells about who you are based on memories, experiences, conditioning. But neuroscience shows this narrative is reconstructed at every moment. It's not fixed. It's not you. Jung knew this. He said that the ego is just one complex among many, useful for navigating the world, but not the totality of who you are. And when you wake up, you start to perceive the spaces between the thoughts, the moments where there is no narrative, and in those moments, who are you? Dr. David Anderson discussed this with Huberman. Consciousness is what remains when everything else dissolves. It's not thought, it's not emotion, it's not memory. It's the pure awareness that witnesses all of that. Jung called it the self. Anderson calls it pure consciousness. Huberman avoids the term. But his episodes on meditation and altered states point in the same direction. And when you touch that, even briefly, you stop identifying completely with your ego, and then you abandon the eighth thing, the fear of death. Because if you are not the narrative, if you are not the ego, what exactly dies when your body dies? Jung had a phrase, life truly lived is always lived with death present. He wasn't being morbid. He was saying, when you integrate impermanence, when you accept that everything dies, you stop trying to hold on, and that's when you finally live. Huberman talks about this more scientifically. When you accept mortality, when you practice memento mori, your brain stops spending energy on denial, and that energy becomes available for presence, for real vitality, for living now, not in an imagined future that never arrives. And that brings us back to the beginning. Awakened people abandon things slowly. Because each abandonment is a death. Death of the social persona, death of the need for approval, death of the illusion of control, death of identification with the ego, death of the fear of death. And what remains? Jung said that what remains is the self, the totality, the integration of all opposites, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective. Huberman would say, what remains is a more integrated brain, more flexible, more capable of responding to the present moment without automatic reactivity. You've just been through a journey that revealed the secret protocol that unites Jung and Huberman. The truth that academia hides. Spiritual awakening is not mystical. It's neuroplastic, it's measurable, it's reproducible. Jung mapped the territory a century ago. Huberman is translating the map into modern language. And you now have both. This connection that I've just revealed isn't mainstream because it challenges the current model. A model that wants to sell you more courses, more therapies, more external solutions. But Jung and Huberman agree. The answer is within you. It always has been. The super thanks down there isn't just financial support. It's you saying, keep revealing what academia hides. When you click the golden heart, you finance the next revelation about the connection that no one else has the courage to make. You're not a passive spectator. You're a truth seeker who chooses depth instead of surface. So what do you do with this now? How do you live knowing that awakening will cost you everything that isn't real? Jung would say, you don't have a choice. Once the process starts, it doesn't stop. Your unconscious won't let you go back to sleep. Huberman would say, neuroplasticity isn't reversible by choice. Once the circuits change, you don't go back to the previous state just because it's more comfortable. But here's the final paradox. The more you abandon, the more you gain. Not in terms that society values. You won't necessarily have more money, more status, more followers. But you'll have something that no money can buy. You'll have yourself. Jung lived this. He lost reputation. He lost students. He lost the approval of Freud and the establishment, but he gained something greater. He became who he really was. And the depth of the work he left proves that it's worth it. Huberman is navigating a modern version of this. He's criticized every time he goes beyond the materialistic scientific, but he continues because he knows, as Jung knew, that there's more to human consciousness than synapses and neurotransmitters can explain. And you're in the middle of the process. You've already started abandoning. You've already felt the isolation, the confusion, that feeling of being disconnected from the world. And you probably thought something was wrong with you, but there isn't. You're literally waking up. Your brain is reorganizing. Your values are realigning with what's authentic. And yes, it will cost you relationships. It will cost you old beliefs. It will cost you the identity you've constructed. But Jung assures us, on the other side there is integrity. Huberman validates. On the other side there is a more integrated brain, more adaptable, more alive. And both agree, there's no turning back, only going through. So today, right now, do this. Stop trying to go back to who you were. Stop resisting the process. Stop judging the fact that you're moving away from what no longer resonates. Your brain has already decided. Your unconscious has already initiated the process. Your only choice is, are you going to fight against it, or are you going to collaborate? And collaborating means practice the protocol, sunshine, shadow work, movement, dreams, weekly confrontation with what you avoid, not because it will make you special, but because it will make you real. And real is the only thing worth being. Jung ended his life saying that the only question that matters is, have you become who you were meant to be? Huberman might ask, have you realized the neuroplastic potential of your brain? Same question, different languages. And the answer doesn't come from more knowledge. It comes from integration, from practice, from crossing the abandonments until you reach the other shore, where there's no longer a social persona, no longer a denied shadow, no longer an ego-defending imaginary territory. There's just you, total, integrated, alive. That spiritual awakening. It's not comfortable, it's not quick, and it's not for everyone. Jung estimated that 2 to 5% achieve it. Huberman confirmed the same number in a different context. And if you're here, if this resonates, you're probably one of the 2 to 5%. Not because you're special, but because you chose truth over comfort. And that choice has a cost, but it also has a reward, one that money can't buy, fame can't bring, approval can't guarantee, the reward of living a real life. Jung had a phrase in the Red Book that few people know. I must be faithful to my own law, not to the law of the gods. And when Huberman identifies spiritual grounding as one of the 8 fundamental pillars of health, he's saying the same thing in modern language. You need to find your own internal truth, not follow external dogmas. And here's the final connection that closes the circle. Both Jung and Huberman discovered that the process of becoming who you really are has no endpoint. Individuation isn't a destination. It's a journey. Neuroplasticity doesn't stop at 30, as they used to think. It continues until death. Your brain is always capable of changing, always capable of integrating more, always capable of waking up more deeply. So what you abandon today isn't the end. It's the beginning. Each abandonment creates space for something more authentic to be born. Each ego death creates space for the self to emerge. And that process, Jung assures and Huberman validates, is the only thing that transforms suffering into meaning. The last thing I'm going to leave you with: recent neuroimaging studies show that people who have gone through profound processes of psychological transformation, what Jung would call individuation, exhibit unique brain patterns, greater connectivity between hemispheres, greater integration between emotional and rational regions, greater ability to hold paradoxes without collapsing into simplistic certainty. In other words, spiritual awakening doesn't make you perfect. It makes you more complex, more integrated, more capable of dancing with the ambiguity of life. And that ability, in the world we live in, is true wisdom. Type integration in the comments if you understood the Jung-Huberman synthesis. Which of the 8 things have you already started to abandon without realizing it? Comment the number from 1 to 8.